Welcome to this Advanced Welsh Bacc Student Support screencast for the individual project. This video focuses on your research methods. Hi everyone. What we're going to start with today is looking at the success criteria for research methods. Okay, so going right from the top. You need to write in full, clear sentences with accurate spelling and grammar. That goes without saying. The only difference is that it's advised that you use a descriptive writing approach for the research methods. You are having to describe how you're going to do something. So it's almost like a set of instructions. And the best way for your reader to understand the method you are going to take is by you describing exactly what you're going to do. So a descriptive writing approach works best. You need to also then describe what primary and secondary research methods you are going to be using to collect your data and information. Remember, data is talking about numbers, graphs, statistics, and then your information is more opinions, articles, journals, so essentially numbers versus words. But you need to say how you're going to collect that data for each aim and objective. I'm just going to expand upon that last part. At a GCSE level, it's enough just to talk about each aim, but at an advanced level, you might need to go into more detail about how you're going to achieve each objective. Okay, so that's why the word count will be larger for the advanced level rather than the GCSE. You need to explain why these research methods that you've selected are suitable, appropriate, reliable, and credible. This will be achieved through applying RURU, which will be explained later on in this presentation. And then finally, explain what you're going to do with the data and information collected from both your primary and secondary research. Now, with all word count guidance, it is dependent on the quality of the writing, not just the word count. But as a guide, an A star to a B, you need to be hitting the 300 minimum words for the research methods with a maximum of 500. You can go over that, but obviously if you do go over it, it starts impacting on the other elements of your project in regards to word count. As a guide then, to get a C or to hit that C level, you need 200 words minimum for your research methods. It's probably worth starting with what are primary research methods and what are secondary research methods. So you would have known from GCSE that primary research is research that you conduct personally, and secondary research has been conducted by someone else, and it's research that you're going to use to inform your understanding of the topics. So if we look at primary first, there's a number of different ways that primary research can be conducted. Surveys and polls, so essentially that's questionnaires. Interviews, very often with specialists or relevant people that are linked to your question. Focus groups are very similar to surveys and polls, but you do have the people in front of you where you can ask them questions. And then observations. If you are observing, let's say, any kind of data or collecting any data by observing something, that is classed as primary research. So as a basic explanation, you could your question could be, how many red cars are passing my house today? And you stand outside your house with a clipboard and a pen, and you make a note of all of the red cars that go past between a certain time, and that would be classed as primary research. So observations are a form of primary research. Moving on to secondary research, this has changed quite a lot in the last 10-15 years, where literature research, the one in the middle, would have dominated a lot of dissertations at degree level. Now what you find is that online research tends to dominate a lot of the dissertations. Now there's a number of reasons for that. It's not that the literature that was used in libraries or in books and textbooks aren't relevant anymore. It's just that a lot of them have been converted into electronic form and are now available via online research. So you're still dealing with the same quality information and data, but you can now access it via online research. If I just kind of share a story with you, when I was in university, we would get a list of books that would be relevant for our research, and as soon as we got that list, it was a rush to get down to the university library to get that book out, because very often there were only 2 or 3 copies, and you had, well over 50 people on the course trying to get those books. So it has made life a lot easier being able to access a lot of these pieces of literature digitally via online. The same for case study research. Lots of case studies, journals, reports, again, are all available online. So the vast majority of secondary research that you will go through these days will be done online. But that doesn't mean you can't use books and textbooks relevant within your field, or case studies that have been printed and you've used. So we've broken it down into primary research and then secondary research. The best way to structure something like this generally is in written paragraph form, where you would focus on the primary research in your first paragraph and then your secondary research in the second paragraph. Now within that paragraph, you need to be addressing your aims, you need to be addressing your objectives, and you're explaining the research methods. So if we just go through these, the first thing you need to answer is what type of primary research have you chosen, and how do you intend to share it. So we do encourage you to do a questionnaire, because that enables you to get lots of data and for you to analyze that data and achieve the high level numeracy marks that are on offer. But interviews are also used very often for primary research. The second one, how many people will be in your sample and what sampling strategy are you going to use? Now at GCSE, it's exactly the same. It's a minimum of 25 people need to take part in your questionnaire. Now you might need to think at advanced level, you need to think more specifically about how that 25 are selected, and that is where we're looking at sampling strategies, which will be explained later on in this video. You're also needing to answer the type of questions that you're going to ask. There is a video later on in this video that explains it, but it's more about talking about open questions and closed questions, and how they can offer you different data and different information to analyze. One being that open questions is really good for information because people are able to express themselves in open questions. Closed data can be worked out numerically. So again, that allows you to present your findings digitally through graphs such as pie charts and bar charts, or any kind of digital form where you can look at the numbers and statistics and analyze the findings. You need to, in your research methods, explain what is going to be done with the information and data collected from your primary research. I just mentioned about that, presenting your results digitally. That is regarded as a high level skill for the advanced level. And then finally, what other primary research methods could you consider? It's important to remember that your research methods, as well as your aims and objectives and your introduction, are done before you start the process, the implementing of your project. So you are planning what you could do. If you say you're going to do an interview and you don't do an interview, that's fine at this point. All you have to do in your self-evaluation, let's say, or your conclusion, is refer to why you didn't pursue that route of research. So what we tend to say is, because a questionnaire is the main use of primary research, it's the most effective. So as an additional method, people tend to talk about conducting an interview with a relevant person or people. Primary. This here now is the secondary, and you will see some similarities. The first part you need to kind of answer is where are you going to locate most of your secondary research? So Remember, online is going to be the majority, but I've mentioned there it could be literature or case studies. So you're just kind of generally anticipating, predicting where you're going to find your information. Then you've got to kind of identify what kind of data and information you're wanting to use and where you believe you'll find it. So you might start talking about the types of websites that you're going to use, the types of secondary sources. So you could be talking about articles, could be talking about journals, reports. It could be anything that has been researched by someone else that you're going to use for your research. But it can be, remember, information based, or it can be number based or data. You need to state how you're going to ensure that these secondary sources or websites are reliable or credible or trustworthy, which again, it will be explained later on in this video. The acronym RURU is a way that we make sure that our sources are reliable. What will be done with the information and data collected from your secondary research? So here you might start talking about how you're going to extract information and data and place it in your project. Now that word extract is quite important because it's not quite simply finding a huge report and pasting it all into your project. It's about looking at a report, finding the relevant data and information. So that could be quotes, it could be a table, and then placing it in your project. With extraction of data, it might be that you've got a very large data set. Okay, so it could be an Excel database that you're working with, and you're just going to be selecting the information you need and producing your own graphs based on that information. That is quite a high level skill for the advanced level, and it is available on our website. There are videos to support you with extracting information and data. Finally, then, you're going to look at what other secondary sources that you will or could use. So very popular these days, as I've mentioned, academic research has changed quite a lot over the last 10-15 years with the emergence of streaming services such as YouTube, iPlayer, Netflix, Prime. You know, lots of these streaming services offer many non-fiction programs, okay, documentaries, which offer lots of research as well. So I think that's a really valuable or rich data source or information source that you could use for your secondary research. Very often, whatever your topic is, it's quite likely that there are documentaries out there that could really help your research. Okay, so if we're looking at sentence starters, okay, the first one, quite simply, when you're talking about what type of research you're going to do primary wise, for my primary research, I intend to produce a questionnaire by using something as simple as that. Okay, you're using a descriptive writing approach in your research methods. It doesn't necessarily have to be littered with lots of academic phrasing or expression. The most important thing in your research method is whoever is reading it knows what you're going to do, how you're going to conduct your research for your primary and your secondary, what you're going to do with the information and data collected. Next one then is talking about the sample size and the strategy, the sampling strategy that you're going to use. Now, I touched upon it earlier. That is going to be important in achieving the top grades, talking about your sampling strategy. At GCSE, it's not necessarily required, but certainly at A level, you need to consider how you're going to select those people who are going to be in your questionnaire. And there's 3 approaches which will be shown in the video later on, talking about simple random, stratified random, and systematic. Now, for the vast majority of you, it will be simple random that you will use for your questionnaire and the participants are in your questionnaire. But it could be really useful to talk about why you didn't use stratified random. Stratified random might be one that you use. Again, this won't make much sense yet until you watch later on in this video. But systematic, for instance, is quite a difficult one to apply. And it might be in your research methods, you're just saying why you didn't pick systematic sampling approach for your research. So an example of a sentence starter: the sample number that will take part in my questionnaire will be, state, and then obviously explain why that's the number, why you felt that that was enough to reflect or get the best information and data from your primary research. How many and what type of questions will you ask? This is talking about open and closed questions. The sentence starter, quite simply, for my questionnaire I intend to create, and you go and explain that. My advice would be, as an absolute minimum, you need 10 questions for your questionnaire. If you have too many questions, the issue you will have is that lots of people won't complete your questionnaire. So 10 as a minimum, and when we're talking about a maximum number of questions, I guess you could say more than 20 would take people a lot of time to answer, especially if you've got lots of open questions there where they've got to respond in long sentences possibly. If they are closed questions, asking 20 questions isn't too bad because there are options for them to select. Again, the video later on in this screencast will explain what is meant by that, and it can help you formulate your questions. What will be done with the information and data collected from the questionnaires? Simple sentence starter: with the information and data I collect from my questionnaires, I plan to, and then talk about what you're going to do with the information, how you're going to analyze the information, what you're going to do with the data, how you're going to present the data digitally, so that's through graphs. You might explain in detail how you're going to do that. So for a lot of people, it would be they might not have the skill set to create graphs yet, so you might in your research methods mention that you need to go and research how to create graphs in Google Docs, or if you're working on Microsoft, talking about creating graphs in Microsoft Word. Again, the descriptive writing method is your friend in the research methods. Okay, so don't be afraid to explain exactly what you're doing. Okay, if I know exactly how your research is going to take place, you have achieved what you set out to do. Finally, what other research methods could you consider? Other primary research methods I will consider include, and for a lot of you, that'll be interview. Don't just finish there. Talk about the benefits of an interview. What could you do with the information and data collected from that interview? Okay, so now we've got the video which is focused on research methods and also the sampling strategy aspect of your research methods. So I mentioned about simple random, stratified random, and systematic. Now, I mentioned earlier that simple random is probably the choice many will apply for their questionnaire. Stratified random could be one that you would consider, and even systematic, but it's more about selecting the right one for your question that is not going to give you, let's say, a biased sample. That's what you're wanting to avoid, because you don't want people criticizing your questionnaire because the people who took it were not suitable and have not given the most unbiased set of data and information. Okay, so it's about selecting the type of method you want, as well as ruling out the methods that you're not going to use, and just explaining why you have ruled out, let's say, systematic sampling. So here's the video now, which will be explained much better than what I can do.
Sampling is a term used in statistics that describes methods of selecting a predefined representative number of data from a larger data population. There are many different sampling methods. Choosing the best method depends on the data population and the statistical problem being analyzed. Whatever the sampling method, the sample should always be representative of the larger data pool from which it is taken. Simple random sampling is the most basic form of sampling. As the name suggests, samples are randomly picked from the data pool until the predetermined sample size is reached. It is best used when there is not much information known about a population or the data is very diverse and not easily grouped into subgroups. Conversely, stratified random sampling is best used with a sample population that can be broken into distinct subgroups. Once the data is divided into subgroups, samples are taken from each one. The number of samples taken from each subgroup is determined on the ratio of the subgroup size to the total data population. This ensures the sample will have data from each subgroup. Finally, systematic sampling uses a pattern for the selection of the sample. Instead of randomly selecting items from the population, systematic sampling will, for instance, select every 10th or 25th item. This method makes it easier and more efficient to make the sample selections.
Okay, so I hope that was useful in explaining the different sampling strategies that you can use, but just by talking about them and applying it, you certainly will be hitting the top bands for your individual project. Now, earlier I mentioned about types of questions and for your questionnaire and looking at open and closed questions. This video explains it really well, the difference between an open and closed question, the benefits of open and closed questions, and the types of questions to ask. Now, at GCSE, we encouraged you to use, let's say, a opinion scale question. So an example of that would be a statement such as social media is damaging the mental health of young people in the UK. That could be your statement. Then you give them the option of, an opinion based, strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, and you could pop a neutral in the middle there to cover all possible answers. That produces good data for us to use because that can be converted into any type of graph, generally a pie chart for analysis. This one gives you a few more options about the types of opinion-based questions or closed questions that you can offer. So let's play this video now.
I have a question for you. What is your favorite book genre? Now that you've mentally answered, let me ask once more, but a bit differently. Which of the following is your favorite book genre? Did your answer change? These two questions are examples of the two variations of user research questions we can ask: open-ended or closed-ended. Closed-ended questions have a limited set of possible answers, but they allow you to analyze the responses a bit easier. Closed-ended questions are great for quantitative usability studies or surveys. Some examples of closed-ended questions include: has this happened before? Which of the following do you own? Overall, this task was on a scale 1 very difficult to 7 very easy. On the other hand, open-ended questions are great because they allow for free-form answers, like lists and stories. One downside of asking open-ended questions is that it can be difficult and more time-consuming to quantify responses from open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are great for exploratory studies like usability testing, interviews, qualitative surveys, field studies, or diary studies. Here are some examples of open-ended questions. What do you think about that? What would you expect to happen if you click that? What would you most want to change about this process? When we conduct research studies, we're in a very curious mindset. We want to find out everything we can about our participants and their experience with our interface. Questions are a great way to get pointed insights, but the way you ask questions matters. Both closed and open-ended questions have their place in user research. Open-ended questions give us insights, but closed-ended questions give us metrics and scale. Knowing when to use each type of question is key to getting the data you need.
Okay, I think that's a really good video, and she mentions about open questions giving you insights and closed questions giving you metric, or what we'd refer to as data. So that's information for open and data for closed questions. One thing I would add regarding your questionnaire is talking about gender and the age ranges that are going to be taking your questionnaire, and justifying why you have picked those groups, let's say. Okay, that should come at the start of your questionnaire, where you would say, what gender are you, what age group are you, giving them a multiple choice. Now the benefit of that is, by doing that, later on then there'll be questions where they might have an opinion scale question. We'll go back to the example I just gave you. Social media is having a negative impact on young people's mental health in the UK. So you would have a set of data for that, and you'd be able to do a pie chart. Now, by asking the question at the start, okay, about, let's say, age groups, you would then be able to create a graph which will hit the level 3 numeracy, where you're not just gauging from your sample what they answered for that question, you're gauging how they might have answered in regards to gender or in regards to age, and it just gives your analysis another level. So you're not just analysing what your sample have said, you're analysing what the over 60s said about this question, for example.
I have a question for you.
Okay. So, secondary research methods now. If we look at the first part, where are you going to locate most of your secondary research? A sentence starter for that might sound like, for my secondary research, I expect to locate most of my information and data from, and then you state where you think you're going to find it. What kind of data and information are you wanting to use, and where do you believe you'll find it? So this is where you start talking about the types of websites that you're going to use, the more reliable web addresses, let's say. So for instance, we could be talking about .gov, .ac.uk, which will be explained in the Ruru video, which I'll be showing you now. So the sentence starters, the types of information I'm going to focus on include, could be articles, journals, documentaries. You just talk regarding your question where the secondary information and data is going to be located, or where you think you're going to find it. The types of data I'm planning of using include, so remember you're differentiating there between the information that you're going to find and the data that you're going to find. Remember, data is numbers, information, opinions and insights. How will you ensure that these sources are reliable, or these websites are reliable? It is through using Ruru. Again, it'll be shown now in the next slide. So sentence starter for this: to ensure my secondary sources are reliable and trustworthy, I intend to, and then you're going to be explaining how you're going to apply Ruru. What will be done with the information and data collected? I mentioned about this, extracting information and data. So a sentence starter that would work for this: with my information and data I collect from my secondary research, I plan to. And this is where you start talking about using the graphs, extracting the relevant information from articles and journals, quoting, let's say, or using quotations. If it's data, you might be using a whole table, or you might be using part of a table. Again, descriptive writing approach is your friend. Okay, by using it, your reader knows what you are going to be doing. So do not be afraid of explaining in detail, even if it feels like you're talking in instruction format. Okay, that's no problem, because it means you're being concise. It means you're being clear. Finally then, what other secondary sources will you use? We mentioned about streaming services and documentaries such as YouTube, Netflix and Prime, BBC iPlayer. All the channels have a version of the iPlayer these days, where there are lots of documentaries where research has taken place, and they talk a lot about, they talk in data, they talk in information, they get insights from professionals. Very often they've got the names of the professionals there, which you can quote. This has been, as I mentioned earlier, a big change in dissertations or individual projects like this, where you do use streaming services as some of your research. So a sentence starter for this, quite simply: other secondary sources I will consider include, and you might add them just with one of the connectives, such as also, if you've got additional secondary approaches that you're going to take, or additional secondary sources that you're going to use. So I've mentioned it a few times, Ruru. It is a way of us understanding and identifying whether a source is reliable. So let's say you find a document online or a report. You should, before you use that information or data, you should conduct a Ruru kind of source analysis. Now this will explain what Ruru is all about, but by applying it, by the end of it, you should be able to understand whether that source is credible and reliable and trustworthy and suitable for your project. Because if you are using sources after your source analysis that are unreliable, that makes your research unreliable. You want to avoid that, and that's what Ruru does for you.
There's so much information around these days. It's hard to know what's credible or trustworthy. So you're going to have to look very carefully at sources to work out what's believable and what's not. Say you're researching climate change. Well, you're going to find a flood of information very quickly. This is where Ruru can really help. It stands for relevant, up-to-date, reliable, and useful. If you're researching tidal energy, it might be helpful to find articles about how the moon affects tides. But if an article goes on to explain in depth how lunar craters are named, it's no longer relevant to your project, even if it is interesting. Only seek out the information you really need, and don't get distracted. Always ask, when was this published? Try to get hold of the most recent research possible. Things change fast, and sometimes something published just a few years, or even only a few months ago, might be out of date today. Some articles say that climate change is the biggest problem the world is facing, whilst others say that climate change isn't a problem at all. They can't all be right. So it's crucial to be able to decide which sources are reliable. And that's not easy. Reliable information doesn't have a particular taste or smell. You need to think critically by asking, where has this information come from? A blog or an official website? Anybody can write a blog, so how reliable is it really? Somebody's probably written a blog explaining why all penguins are evil. That doesn't necessarily make it true. If it's the site of an organisation, for example, a news outlet, a university, a government, or a private company, it might well mean the website is very official and impressive, but does that make it trustworthy? Sources can often have hidden agendas, or reasons for posting information that you might not be aware of unless you do your research. If you read an article about how climate change isn't real and how fossil fuels are the future, and it's been published by an oil company, then that should ring some alarm bells over its reliability. What you're really looking for is organisations that always list their sources so that you can double-check them. Universities are a good example, as are official government websites or famous science institutions. For instance, nearly all scientists agree that the most trustworthy evidence about climate change can be found on the NASA website. Information may well be reliable, up-to-date and relevant, but will it actually be useful for your research? Question everything. Check whatever you can and you'll produce a project that's based on solid research, unless the penguins get to you first.
Okay, so I think that really explains to you exactly what Ruru is, and it's very easy to apply when it's broken down into those 4 parts. In the research methods, you don't need to perform Ruru on your sources because you haven't identified your sources at this point. But later on in the project, when you come to the source analysis part, Ruru is going to be very important in completing that aspect of the project. But you need to be thinking critically about your sources. We can't simply have students just going into Google, searching their topic, and then clicking on the first link that comes up on the top of a search engine, because what you've got to remember is that the majority of information that appears on the top of a search engine will be based on profit, because they have paid in companies to ensure that their website will appear first in a Google search. Okay, so be very aware of that, and you should be applying this process to your everyday life. Okay, when you listen to anything in the news, you've got to you can apply Ruru all of the time. And again, the later video regarding source analysis will go into more detail about this, but you might want to, after this, look at that video on source analysis for Ruru, which is in this collection as well. Now, obviously, everything I've gone through there is at an advanced level, okay, and some of it might be difficult to comprehend, or some parts. You might have found it very straightforward and you're ready to start your research methods. But we do have a GCSE site which has got very similar resources, such as what I've just shown to you, but it is at a GCSE level. So if you feel you need a little bit more support and you're not quite clear on certain aspects of the research methods, please do not be afraid to look at the GCSE resources. Okay, yes, they're not set at the advanced level, but even if you use the GCSE resources and did it well, you could end up with a B grade in your individual project. So the information there is very relevant. It's what I share in this advanced one is to make sure that you can hit the grades above a B. Okay, so don't be afraid if you need that extra support by using the GCSE individual project support website, which is available on your Google Classroom. I know that was a long video. I hope it has been useful and can support you through the process of writing your research methods. Thanks for watching.